Dear Dr. Lisle, men often have to listen to pop psychology telling them to, quote, get in touch with their emotions, not be ashamed of showing weakness, etc. It seems to me that pathetic communication, or showing weakness, from a man is a pretty honest and carefully weighted signal in the ancestral environment because although it may bring them help and sympathy, it's also going to hit their mate value pretty hard. Do you agree? And do you think that there are situations where a man showing weakness to a woman can be positive? Conversely, can women get away with it easily, or is weakness also a signal of sexual interest when it comes to them?
Sort of more than one idea floating around there. The first idea, I think, sort of one of the more ludicrous things is the notion that men should be doing this or men should be doing that. From some fool that's writing in the media, it's going to sort of try to explain how it is that the people that are out there actually trading for real live chips with real live stakes in the world don't know how to run their own show when it comes to expressing their emotional responses. That's ridiculous. So, of course, this writer has nailed it, that men aren't suppressing their emotions and looking tougher than they are. They're just following evolutionary guidelines. And so that means, of course, often the way the mind works has possibly two or more competing agendas. And on the one hand, it might be wanting to draw sympathy because it feels like it's got a problem. But on the other hand, it recognizes that to do so and try to cash in some insurance chips to get a lighter load or to get some kind of resources or a break or some kind or assistance, that it's going to cost it. Okay, and so I think I just had a memory. Very few listeners are old enough to remember a classic movie called The Summer of 42, where I think a kid named Hermie lives next door to a beautiful young woman whose husband has gone off to war. It was Jennifer O'Neill. And he comes over and he starts helping her with things because now she's a single lady effectively with her husband off to war. And at one point she wants some things lifted into the attic. And Hermie, who's a pretty strong young kid of 17, 18, high school student, he's lifting this like a toolbox or whatever it is. And you see him, it's beautifully done. He's grimacing like crazy as he lifts this box, and it's all he can do to lift it into the attic. And he wants to make it look like it's easy. And she might even say, "Do you need some help?" Or, "Oh no, he's fine." What guy hasn't done this? Okay, so me a lot, because without a lot of strength, I got to do a lot of bluffing when everybody was watching. So anyway,
me and my dad used to compete as to who can take the most amount of groceries with one trip. When my mom brought them home.
Right, exactly.
No help.
So
wouldn't allow anybody to help.
No, actually, and in a classic finding in ethology, it was I know the guy's name. It's gonna leap out at me. It's Amos Zahavi at the University of Tel Aviv, I believe. In studying the Arabian babbler, which is a little bird, how the males will beat up the other males if the other males try to help out by defending the tribe. They won't let them do it. So like, hey, no, we don't need your help. Okay, if anybody's going to get killed, it's going to be me.
I wonder if there's a correlation between birds like that and whether or not they like the movie Armageddon.
Yeah, exactly. So this is, excuse me. So this is clearly males have to essentially deal with the competing demands of survival and reproduction, and so you're best off looking like you've got such great fitness that you don't need help, don't need assistance, don't need anybody to give you directions. You don't need anybody to give you any sympathy. And so, yeah, if you are literally crying from the pain of whatever it is, don't show it. Okay, so this is so the notion that men should, quote, show their feelings more is ludicrous. They're designed by nature to display their feelings when they're evolutionarily advantageous, and they do so. And so every situation is different. So of course, there's going to be times when it's going to be great to show your feelings. Like here's one of these times. So you thought that you were in love with a girl, but it turns out, lo and behold, after you successfully woo her into bed, you were playing casual mating strategy and didn't know it. And so now you have some feelings of guilt about this and some feelings of confusion. This is a great time to really show your feelings of confusion and your feelings of angst about how puzzled you are in this life and how difficult it all is for you, and how you really have deep feelings for her, but at the same time, you're confused. There's good times to show your feelings, okay? And there's good times to not show your feelings. Depends on what the feelings are, depends on who the audience is and what the stakes are. So, yeah. So I can't remember the rest of the question, but
forget it. We don't want to go over more, Dr. Lisle.
No, I think I'm in enough trouble as it is, so I think we ought to just go on to the next question.
Every male listener was
all
like,
right.
you just blew our secret. How could you?
All right. What else do we have?
No, I'm just kidding. No, we were okay. Yeah, all right. All right. So, dear Dr. Lisle, love to hear a Doug download on the perceived difference between a competence hierarchy and a dominance hierarchy. Objectively, I'm not sure there is one, but subjectively, relative to the observer, perhaps there's a huge difference. If you look to the far left, every hierarchy is based on dominance. If you look to the far right, every hierarchy is based on competence. So we don't find anything particularly interesting at the extremes. What interests me is in the middle and how our nervous systems seem to be tuned to pay attention when we appear to be operating on a dominance or competence basis. I'm particularly interested in the individuals who seem to be tortured about this appearance. Some people seem to be so driven to compete and rise to the top. However, their internal audience is constantly asking them, are you sure you're not being too dominant? Is this step up worth it? Either directly or indirectly in the form of general stress. Emotional stability seems to be a huge component of how this plays out on an individual basis. I'd be curious to know what you think. Curious if you think this competence dominance inner battle is part of what plays into the pleasure trap. It seems as though some people are unable to resist the pleasure trap the further they rise in a particular hierarchy, as a way of compensating and reducing their appearance of dominance, thereby quieting the neural chip inside them that is constantly monitoring their competence dominance status.
I think we better stop there because I think it's wandering into the weeds. I don't think any of this has anything to do with the pleasure trap. The pleasure trap is a novel evolutionary problem that doesn't have anything to do with human evolution. So now the notion of a competence versus dominance hierarchy also doesn't really make any sense. In other words, at least not to me, it's a hierarchy itself implies dominance. Okay, so just a matter of what degree we're talking about. So rather than use the word dominance, let's just call the whole thing influence. So dominance may be a word that conjures up a great deal of baggage that comes with it that can get confusing, and then thinking that we have to parse this thing out into different dynamics rather than the one that there is. Think of the whole thing as a hierarchy, and so that hierarchy has influence. So the hierarchy, there's a hierarchy in Miss America contest, right? So nobody needs to be more competent than anybody, and nobody needs to be dominating anybody. But what we're seeing is that the winner had more influence over the voters' perceptions for whatever reasons. Bought some people off, slept with somebody, who the heck knows, okay? But in principle, what there is there's a slotting of relative influence. That's the way to look at this. So that obliterates the competence-dominance dichotomy, which is a false dichotomy. So now it's going to turn out that in different circumstances, so when we start talking about dominance hierarchies in general, we're talking about sort of leadership over a group. So so what's going to happen is that different conditions, different ecological conditions with respect to a group and what it needs, what it's weighing, these things are going to have different judgment criteria. So that's how this is going to go. So it may be that you need to be the funniest. It may need to be the kindest. That may be how this hierarchy is being slotted. You may need to be the best all-around balance between compassion and strength. So you can imagine in a Stone Age village that the individuals involved who are themselves essentially a congregation of a marketplace of a different trading, the trading of different values, most predominantly insurance, protection, etc., against the vicissitudes of life across various dimensions. It could be tribal warfare, it could be famine, it could be injury, etc. So there's a many criteria that could be used, and when it came to leadership and dominance generally in human history, there was not one criterion. So this is how human beings are. One of the many ways that human beings are significantly different than so many other animals. They literally have dominance hierarchies, and the dominance hierarchies is literally physical vigor. It's size, strength, viciousness. These are the dimensions. It's literally who is willing and capable of doing the most damage to a competitor. That's how dominance hierarchies are dealt. There's no other way to do it. The two stallions threatening for the mating rights to the herd, those are vicious fights, and they're not resolved until one stallion has demonstrated to the other one that if we continue, you're going to get the worst of it, and it's going to be bad. Okay. Humans are vastly more complex than this. There's more on the line than just mating success. There is a member of the insurance pool. There's also the entire safety of the insurance pool completely. So in our modern political environment, the great angst of the left wing at this point in this country is that many of them honestly and deeply fear that Trump's personality is a destabilizing and dangerous set of characteristics that could walk us into nuclear war, walk us into all kinds of disastrous consequences. So that's one of the things that they are deeply fearful, and why it is that they dislike him. That's one of the reasons, is that they feel like this is not anything close to an ideal leader. This is actually vastly eons away from it in terms of the criteria variables that they would use to analyze what's in their best interest. Okay, so so you can see that in different times, a group of people under certain conditions, they would intuitively and collectively tend to vote for someone who would be very strong, very dominant, very aggressive, and potentially unstable enough to be dangerously protean, so that his behavior couldn't be predicted. Now, this to some degree resembles Trump. Trump is the most protean president I think we've ever had. Protean meaning unpredictable. You can't tell what he's going to do. And so this keeps everybody back on their heels. It gives everybody wide berth. If you want to think about this, I have a friend of mine who's similarly disagreeable that has stated that once in a while what he'll do when he's driving is he'll wiggle the car into the opposing lane. And he does this so that you and I know this individual, Nathan.
Don't forget I'm there. That's the point of doing that?
He used to be your boss. The reason for this is to have everybody give him very wide berth. So therefore make himself safer. That's the point. That's why he does it. And I would never think of anything like this. That to me is crazy, but it's not actually crazy. It's a very interesting strategy, although it's aggressive and bizarre. You can imagine that there would be times in world history, probably many times in world history, where those kinds of characteristics would have been perceived to be advantageous, and they would have been advantageous if you game it out in terms of game theory. Now, there's going to be other times when that's not going to be true. So in times of relative peace, where the person on the other side of the river is not particularly aggressive and is reasonable, then we would want a reasonable person to be at the head of or representative of our village so that we can just maintain the peace. But if we have somebody over there that's very aggressive and opportunistic, then that may not be the best strategy. So this is so all the questions of dominance, hierarchy, and competence. This is all going to mold together in nothing other than an issue of influence, and in the case of a village, a generalized preference. So so in human societies, as opposed to animal societies generally the herd's survival is not on the line. These are on the decision making of the leader. Usually, the leaders are males fighting over mating, and conflicts of interest within the herd. This is not what's going to take place with respect to human dominance hierarchies. So they're influence processes, and they generally have the interests of the group as a very important integral factor of what's being decided, rather than just the sexual preferences of a bunch of females and a bunch of males on the sidelines that don't really have anything to say about it. So anyway, that's the answer here. Leadership ideals or influence variables are highly variable, or the criteria are highly variable depending upon situation. And the competence dominance hierarchy is an interesting conceptualization, but it ultimately won't hold up.
Mm-hmm. And now to the point about furthering as you rise in a particular hierarchy, people may be more unable to resist the pleasure trap. You've talked about this in your pleasure trap book when you talked about Elvis Presley, where
that's a little different issue. So in other words, that's not because he rose in hierarchies per se. It's because he had resources. Okay, so anybody with enough money to lie around, eat whatever they want, and have it order a doctor around to give them whatever drugs they want, that person's in that same set of circumstances. So that's not rising in a hierarchy. That's just having a lot of resources. So that, I don't think those two things are particularly correlated. In other words, I don't think that you're going to find that the CEOs of the Fortune 500 are in the pleasure trap more than the average citizen in the United States. Okay. In fact, I would expect that would be less the case, by the way. In other words, the conscientiousness that's required to rise in those hierarchies is going to play itself out in the intelligence. Okay. So they're going to be less pleasure trapped than the average Joe. So yeah, those are, I see why someone might have made that connection reading the pleasure trap, but that's a spurious correlation.
Okay. Yeah. My assumption, again, thank you for clarifying it. My assumption was that the less village pressure you have to make ends meet, the more your psychology will take over in such a world of abundance. But okay.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, except that probably everybody, you're sort of watching the situation now. It's not like people get up at the crack of dawn and strap on their tool belt and work to their fingers to the bone the way they might have 50 years ago. So most of the people in the world, they may go to work, but they're not working particularly physically taxing jobs, most people. And so it isn't like they're exhausted. So, and everybody has essentially equal access to the pleasure trap. So that it's cheap, it's easy, it's convenient as hell. So, yeah, I don't. There would have been a time in the world where hardworking people barely making ends meet wouldn't have had the opportunity to get into the pleasure trap because they couldn't have afforded it. But that's no longer the case.
Okay. Thank you.
No.
All right, Dr. Lisle. Dear Dr. Lisle, thank you for doing the podcast. You've given an 18-year-old male.
Second.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead. Let's do this. Go ahead and do this question. Then
Okay.
Remember, we got to listen. We got a
Yeah, so
questioner.
we'll do this question, then we'll get the listener on hold. So,
sorry
so
to
Joe,
interrupt
hang in
you.
there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. Okay. Dear Dr. Lisle, it's okay. Thank you for doing the podcast. You've given an 18-year-old male some wisdom to think clearly enough to end a relationship gone south. Thank you so much. I'm a big fan of evolutionary psychology, and I often hear conversations on topics that have been perfectly illuminated by evolutionary thinking. But I'm often reluctant to share this useful information because of the social stigma around it. There's a new meme going around that people who think in Darwinian terms are creepy, involuntary, celibate, misogynists. And I've seen female friends of mine having a visceral disgust emotion to it. I want to spread the truth of evolutionary psychology, but I also don't want to hurt my mating chances by getting labeled a reject. Should I keep my evolutionary thoughts a secret and only explain it in easy-to-digest chic talk? Or should I spread these ideas with testicular fortitude? I'd love both of your takes on it. I just now added a new phrase to my vocabulary.
Yeah, testicular fortitude. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I had just barely enough testicular fortitude to just fail miserably. Yeah, you should be warned. Don't do as I do. Do as I say. Be smooth. Ask them what their sign is. Stuff like that. No, this is a wonderful question, and keep in mind that these ideas are many of them very revolutionary, counterintuitive, and they are also very threatening to many people. And so one of the things George Bernard Shaw said, if you're going to tell the truth, make them laugh or they'll kill you. And I think that's pretty close to an exact quote. So this didn't escape this writer. And this, so keep this in mind, that these ideas, the way an idea is introduced, the way that is said, how it is said, with how much vehemence, these are all very important, stylistic features of sharing interesting, exciting, novel, controversial, and threatening ideas. So many times I've given so many lectures in my life. I've given lectures where, for one reason or another, who knows what I was listening to on the radio or music when I walked in the door, but I came in like fired up, ready to take on anybody, and ready to lay the truth on an audience. And sometimes when that happens, that if I happen to be, God knows, probably peaking in my pathetic little testosterone cycle, then it can sometimes get uncomfortable because I'm feeding too much, too fast, too harsh, and the people aren't actually adequately prepared. And there may be personalities in the audience that are particularly threatened, and it doesn't go well, and I really don't like that. And I'm not sure what purpose is served or what gains are had by such a sort of confrontative process. Much better to have things, much warmer, and it can be curious and interesting and somewhat controversial, but you should keep a kind of a Paul Newman-like smirk, a friendliness about it, and a warmth about it, and a good humor about it that that if you share these ideas, that we aren't going to battle. So I would tone down the testicular fortitude, and I would make things warmer. And these ideas can be shared in ways that are inherently fascinating for people. This is what we call source code. When you start actually speaking directly to the way the system is engineered, it recognizes truth, and lights start going on as the system for the first time actually gets insight, conscious insight into its own design. And so so it can be great. There's a reason why there's 50 women out there who might not have ever given me a second date, but they had a very interesting time listening to the Doug Download. In fact, they might have written me questions afterwards about it. Not that they wanted to see me again, but they were curious and they had questions. So
everyone gets to keep the placemat, right?
So they get to keep the placemat, exactly. That's happened more than once that women folded up the paper that I wrote on all over the tablecloth, the paper tablecloth, and put it in their purse. So be a little smoother, and you'll have a little better luck when it comes to gene spreading facsimile behavior.
All right. Fantastic. All right, so we've got a caller on hold, and so we'd like to welcome the caller. Joe, welcome to the show. Thanks for calling.
Hi.
Hi there.
Hi, Doctor. Hello, Dr. Lau and Nate.
Very good.
Welcome.
Very good to hear from you.
I
All
only listen to your podcast. I find that the other podcasts are important, but they just don't matter.
We're having a little time
Joe,
hearing
we're having
you,
a little
Joe.
audio trouble. If you can keep your phone directly in front of your mouth and tell us your question.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
Fire when ready.
I have a question about bravery.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been watching the Hong Kong protests, and at first I wasn't paying much attention to it, even though I have a lot of family members there, and I do go back once or twice a year to see them, and it's kind of my second home. But I wasn't paying a lot of attention to it because, to me, this protest is an example of David versus Goliath, and in this case, David just don't stand a chance. And why is David even fighting? You know, so my first question is, what is the CB of the Hong Kong people? And then my second question is, there have been numerous news about the communist government harvesting organs from healthy freedom fighters in China who practices Falun Gong. You know, it's a kind of ancient meditation breathing exercise practice to calm the nerves. And I've never done it before, but I just heard that it is a very lucrative business for the communist government. And the Hong Kong people obviously knows about it. And, you know, if there are a lot of cameras in Hong Kong now, and they are 5K quality. So if they get caught, obviously they will stand a chance to be put in this so-called education camps, and you know they stand a chance to have their organs harvested while being alive and with no anesthesia. So how did they even get the courage to stand up to protest against this evil giant? And one day I was watching this YouTube video about this lady who stood up against one of those fake cops that were sent over from China to pretend, you know, to take down the people, and she kind of yelled at him, and then because the cop was, you know, raising her voice at her, and then but she wouldn't stand down, and from what I saw, she's highly disagreeable. But as the camera was on her at first, you know, thinking that she's going to just, the cop was asking her for her Hong Kong ID. And then she said, hey, can you be a little bit more polite to me and stop yelling at me in my face? If you want me to show you my Hong Kong ID, why don't you show me your police ID to me first? And then obviously the cop couldn't show it to her because we think he's a fake one sent down from China. And then this video kind of became viral, and she's kind of became the hero of the Hong Kong protest online community. And to me, she's kind of brave, you know. But I see the reason that she's brave towards him is because she's disagreeable and she's open to new experience. So my second question is bravery a personality trait that's strongly associated with disagreeability and openness to new experience, or is it a genes that's passed down from our ancestors? Because some people just don't have the guts to stand up to evil forces when time comes. And I would like to know if it's a gene.
Oh yeah, this is definitely genetic. All personality characteristics are. So, and you're accurately identifying this, Joe, that disagreeableness has a huge amount to say about this. So you're going to find that very disagreeable people will do very dangerous acts, and some of those acts will be heroic, and some of them won't be heroic. They'll be something else. When it comes to what can appear to be incredibly dangerous acts of defiance or combat, often in a potential rage, what you're going to find is a chemical called dihydrotestosterone, and this is I think women have almost none of it, so I don't know what this woman had other than just disagreeable. But men have this. I'm sure we're going to find out as you find out slowly about everything, that men and women have differential amounts, and the amounts are, considerably different, but they're going to probably be in both genders. Now, but what we know about dihydrotestosterone is that it's involved with essentially short-term supercharging of the effects of testosterone. So this is where men get unbelievably gutsy, men and women potentially, but particularly men. So men will get unbelievably gutsy about taking on someone or something where the odds are overwhelmingly against them. And the question is, why? How could such a thing evolve? And the answer would be that there would be mating chips that would be making up for the risks that would be incurred by the statistical likelihood of death as a result. So you could see that, well, let's suppose that you had a very dangerous, unfair, untrustworthy adversary who wasn't agreeing, would agree to something and then was taking more. In other words, you can imagine a situation where you had surrendered and then they, let's forget the idea that we had arms. Let's go back to a time when it was hand to hand with knives, okay, knives and clubs, and we could see that we were going to be 15 against 7, and they started to hold us down, and then we said, okay, we cry uncle. So we have some local custom of how it is that we display this, and so we make that display. We're full of testosterone. We're our little tribal chief, but we essentially make this display, and we have all of our guys make the display. One of which is dead, one of which is going to be dead, and there's 5 of us left, and there's 15 of them, and we've damaged a couple of them. So now it's 13-5. Now the sociopathic SOB that happens to be their chief comes over with his knife and cuts one of our heads off. Okay, now what you're going to see is the remaining 4 of us running the cost-benefit analysis. And the cost-benefit analysis is going to say, okay, going belly up didn't work with this monster. So what we're going to feel is a surge of rage. And that rage is going to energize an all-out effort to at any cost inflict whatever damage we can, so that we potentially either live or die, but we may actually be so dangerous that they have to renegotiate. And so this is and effectively running the CB that it's the best strategy. You could see how this would be. You could see that in fights between men, there's a cost benefit about how risky a strategy that you take, how self-sacrificing of your own health. So this is you can imagine two men in close quarters grappling with each other, and one of them decides, I'm going to bang my forehead right into your forehead as hard as I can. Interesting strategy. And it's a strategy that if you are in serious trouble and you can feel like you're otherwise going to lose, better to trade even, okay, for a moment, because maybe you just might get the better end of it. So this kind of hyper-aggressive, very, very dangerous all-in strategy that also has a protean component. In other words, whoa, we went from one side of the matrix to the other side of the matrix. And this will very often get a stronger, more dangerous opponent to back off. It's like, whoa, we've got something to lose here. You can imagine going into a crowd with a bunch of unbelievably dangerous people, in other words, that are proteanly angry. And if you're a cop, you don't want to go into that crowd. There's people in that crowd that they seem to not care. This is the freakish thing that you'll see sometimes on tape of people beating themselves and so on and so forth. It's like, look out. They're dangerous. They, quote, don't care. Okay? So this is part of what it is that you're seeing. You're seeing there's an element of this process that's going on. And so this is that's part of a deep evolutionary strategy. I saw this a great deal when I worked in the prisons. And I saw facsimiles of it. In other words, I didn't see the real strategy, but I saw the strategy start to get activated where less fearsome prisoners would display high levels of anger and basically say that they didn't care what the consequences were about so-and-so that is, threatening them to take advantage of them, that they, I won't use their language, but the notion is, I don't care what happens to me. And it's like, well, if you can actually make that case, then you may absolutely get concessions out of a bigger, stronger opponent. The opponent's job isn't to see you dead or isn't to win. Their job is to win and stay intact with a minimum of damage. That's a very different outcome than just winning. So it depends upon an opponent having measured risks. And if your opponent does not have measured risks, they just got unbelievably dangerous. A 125-pound little male against a 250-pound monster, that 125-pound male is actually extremely dangerous if he literally is willing to go all in and with the attitude of, I don't care what happens to me. Okay? And you can see how such a thing could evolve, particularly when it comes to village protection. Because if you've got wife, children, etc., that you're protecting, you can see how you could evolve an insurance scheme in bravery that would be passed down through genes that would drive dihydrotestosterone that would most often wind up in males. You wouldn't want to put it in females because they've got other jobs to do. They've got children to look after, children to protect, and they're not going to be specializing in weaponry, and they don't have nearly the size and strength of males. So we don't need it there, okay? Where we need it is we need it in the males. And we need it measured, and we need it tied to senses of justice, which it typically is. And so under just the right conditions, you can activate it. And I've had it activated in my head more than once. So me of meager testosterone fortitude, testicular fortitude, has had enough that under conditions that can activate inside my nervous system. And I do have the attitude of, I'm going to get you and I'm going to do you very serious damage, and I don't care what happens to me. Okay? Now, fortunately, I live in a very civilized world with people that aren't usually doing that much damage or threatening that much damage, and I've got enough IQ and enough stability that those impulses didn't go anywhere, but they were there, just right out of an evolutionary psychology textbook. So, what is courage and bravery? It's mostly the activation of very interesting, aggressive, strategic instincts that will come about under certain conditions in certain individuals. And it is absolutely genetic, and it requires just like all instincts require the ecological input in order to activate them. Just as if you light a fire in your gas fireplace and it goes whoosh, you go back automatically. That's an instinct to that threat. You have similar instincts to when it is that you will suddenly become brave. Mm-hmm. So that's a very good question, Joe, and thank you for asking.
Joe, thank you very much for the call.
Hello?
Oh.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe?
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I have something to add.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of women, they kind of stood up, and they're kind of
mm-hmm.
brave, standing in
mm-hmm.
front of the fake cops alone by
mm-hmm.
themselves, even 70-year-old women, they
mm-hmm.
are doing it. So do you think that the genes kind of have evolved as time goes by, and now that because women don't really need a man to stand there and protect them, they kind of evolve to have this bravery gene as well?
No, it's got nothing to do with that. They haven't evolved any such thing. They're smart enough that they're recognizing that there's a wider force of social processes, and if they do this, it is well recognized that they are helpless. And so a surefire way for a regime or a regime of male dominance or an individual male to lose all credibility and to have the wrath of the world targeted at them is to attack a female. And so that's what's going on. So those females are disagreeable enough, but they've also run a cost benefit, and they believe that they will not be targeted in a way that a male would be targeted for exactly those reasons. So this is that's what's happening. No, they have not evolved some spectacular courage. That's not what's taking place there.